Hey, folks, welcome to the Ginger and Chocolate Podcast. I am Lindsay along with my co host, Mike. What up, Mike?
Hey, good to see you, Lindsay. Excited for the
Good.
show today. We got an awesome guest, and we're gonna get into it.
We do. Today, our guest is Steve Keesal. He is returning. He was a host. A host? He was a guest earlier this year. We had a wonderful talk, and I really wanted to bring him back and have a conversation between Steve and Mike because Mike didn't make our last episode, and I think that they have a lot in common. So, with that, Mike, I'm going to let you kind of kick things off.
Okay, yeah. Hey, Steve, good to meet you, brother. And I'm excited for this episode. Excited to get down to it and talk and hash it out.
It's good to meet you too, and all of that esteem is entirely mutual. I think the world of what you guys are doing, and I really enjoyed myself the last time I was with you guys. So I'm excited to be here today.
Outstanding. So I know we talked before about talking a little bit about post-traumatic stress disorder, um, stress that comes after operations, the stress that comes after deployments, and how it affects us, I guess, in theater and back at home and after we get out, and what it looks like for recovery and healing and transitioning forward.
I love talking about this, and it was easy for me because I think that there was a combined intensity level that was so extreme. Uh, I finished the army in kind of a hurry. You know, you wait for it all
Mm-hmm.
your life, but the way it worked with us was there was a stop loss, and that stop loss kept me over for an extra 65 days beyond what my normal on the back of my ID card
Mm-hmm.
time in the army should have been.
What is
And
a stop loss?
okay, so the way three different, and it's important to understand whether you were the guy from Chicago or the rich kid from Texas, or I mean, whichever of the three presidents, which were very different presidents during Afghanistan and Iraq, their policy was not to draft. Their policy was to hold people over in a part on the back of the contract. It says members may be forced to serve 24 months beyond this contract at the convenience of the president.
It's part of the fine
And
print.
yeah, and this is interesting because this goes across political affiliations. That this is something that everybody thought was the right way to handle it, was instead of drafting people, you would hold people per MOS, military occupational specialty, so that you had the right people to do the job, and that people who were, it's like the least fair thing you could possibly imagine in your life. You know, it's an all volunteer RV, but there were a ton of people who were called back, who had just started families or who
Yeah.
had just started great jobs. And, the way they called people back was that essentially people who were highly skilled could go back to uh, either like a reserve unit, which maybe didn't have the training, or they could sign on for another very long period of time to assure that they were with their comrades or with
Mm-hmm.
people who were operating on their level of professionalism. So,
So did
One
it,
they
one
did
way.
they just take people who sucked and go, okay, you're done, your contract's over, and
no, it was done by specialty. So,
okay,
if you like for in the civilian world, if you were an accountant or if you were a lawyer, or in the military world, if you were an infantryman
Mm-hmm.
or a medic or something like that,
okay,
they would extend your contract. So
Yeah.
it's important, I think, for everybody to know that that was absolutely across the political spectrum of the United
Mm-hmm.
States what everybody thought was a good idea for three
Yeah.
administrations that probably couldn't have been more different.
There's
You
one
know,
thing I guess that relates it to our endurance folks that are listening is it's imagine doing a full Ironman You get to the finish line and they say, congratulations. However, you still have to run another marathon before you finish. And then we'll get your medal and then you can go home. So
That's
it's
where I fall to the ground and die. So,
yeah, yeah.
wow.
So, so I got out of the army, and Maya, I think this is important because you don't realize when you're hanging out with you know other people who are just like exactly how you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was landed in paradise. All I have to do is go to college at Long Beach State, and I'm sitting at a party on someone's patio in Sunset Beach, California, surrounded by everybody's fantasy. It's a good-looking surfer girls, and everybody is calm and relaxed, and it's just the most beautiful setting you could possibly imagine. And I realize that I'm on the moon.
Mm.
And I talked to a Marine who happens to be sitting next to me, who was a Marine from an earlier area, and he said, "Hey, are you the guy who just got out of the Army?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, it takes a couple of years to adjust, but don't worry, you adjust, and this will be fine."
Mm-hmm.
And so there were a few things that I noticed were wrong with me. There was a lot wrong with me at the time. I was a heavy drinker, and I mean drank like a fish all the
Par for the
time.
course, military culture, really, right?
Mhm. And the thing I noticed was wrong with me though was that I would go from 0 to 60 as far as anger was concerned, and it
Mm-hmm.
would take me a really long time to come down from being that angry or that upset.
Mm-hmm.
And it would happen in an instant and it would last forever. And at the same time, there was no calibration between, what made me upset. There was, something tiny could set me off, and something big, might not be as big a deal, or it might be a big deal. But I wasn't upset proportionately
Hmm.
to whatever was presenting itself in front of me.
Were you aware of that at the time that you were overreacting? Maybe.
Not right at the beginning, Mike, but I
Yeah.
became aware of that.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I became aware of things I didn't like about myself before I wanted help or
Mm-hmm.
before I got sober.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of an interesting thing is to know that there is know that there is a problem for a number of months, and feel like you're kind of maybe circling the drain or the
Mm.
whirlpool or
Yeah.
the or the abyss or whatever. So
I relate to that quite a bit. I definitely circle the drain on my own sobriety. And one quick thing I wanted to say about the anger and the disproportionate. I don't necessarily relate to the anger 0 to 60, but I do relate to a disproportionate response to things. And I've heard in AA they've said, like something catastrophic can happen, and an alcoholic can go right through it, no problem, and then you get a paper cut and it's like you need to call the suicide hotline,
Mm.
and that was how I dealt with life as well,
Yeah.
you
yeah,
know.
I think that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
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 Yeah.
It's not a great way to live, for sure.
No, it's
So
oh,
what were you like when you got out, Mike?
I was similar to you in that I was drinking heavy because that's what I knew of how to calm down, or that's how I knew to access feelings. And um, I was angry. I remember uh, random things pop out to me. I don't know. I'm going in between panic attacks, walking down my stairs, and having a visceral memory of being in a house where, we had a gunfight and I was trapped on some stairs. And it would go from panic attacks where I don't know what's happening, or I'm driving and someone finds a parking spot before I do, and all of a sudden I'm trying to get out of the car and fight this person who got the parking spot, disproportionately angry. And I noticed people around me started to get a little worried and uncomfortable because, I became a liability that way. And I didn't understand what was going on. I just knew that there was a lot of things happening inside and I didn't like it.
Y- You know, as we get better, and I'm always talking with a dear friend of mine who was a Force Recon Marine, and he's our best friend, Tony Nevada. He performed Hope and I's wedding. There were three people in the ceremony, himself and Hope and I. Okay. We have heard a term, post-traumatic growth,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it's this is we talk about the scar tissue that the three of us have. And I think it's important for people to understand that on the other side, if you're willing to put in the work, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, the work started with sobriety. And I thought it was interesting because at the West LA VA, the first thing they told me in my rehabilitation, or drug and alcohol rehab,
Mm-hmm.
was run by a guy who was an airborne ranger in Vietnam. And he said in the first week, you guys are going over, myself and one other guy, roughly my age, you guys are going over to the PTSD outpatient services team, which was, a building that was 200 yards away from the building where we were getting sober,
Yeah.
and starting immediately. And then I had an intake meeting with Leslie Martin and Jim Dwyer. And these are guys who had been working on post-traumatic stress disorder since the Vietnam War. And they said, look, we just want you to know we won't talk to anybody who hasn't been 30 days in total abstinence of drugs and
Mm-hmm.
alcohol.
Yeah.
And because you can't work on a moving target, right? You know what I mean?
Right.
And I thought, okay, well, that's delightful because that's exactly, where I am, in life. But so many of our friends, continue to want to drink or have a
Mm-hmm.
smoke or any of these things. And if you can, uh, my hat is off to anyone who can maintain that lifestyle. And God knows I'd be with them if I only could.
Yeah.
Oh
But
yeah.
but the important thing is that if you are willing to maintain yourself,
Mm-hmm.
you can get on the other side of these things, and you can be stronger. Now, that intensity that we have is always going to be there,
Yeah.
and I think as long as you recognize what it is, it can be a gift. Intensity is to us a value.
Yes.
Okay, and I'll talk about intensity. I want to talk about intensity because this is great,
Yeah.
but
Me too.
also obsessive attention to detail, which when I'm working with people, or with my best friend and love of my life, my wife Hope, do luckily she sees what is the very worked on part of me as far
Mm-hmm.
as attention to detail and obsession and that kind of stuff. But it's still on a scale of 1 to 10, it's probably a 12,
Oof.
you know? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, when you talk about
Intent.
that intensity, yeah, I want to
Hmm.
talk about that with you because the intensity, I see it as, we have energy, right? We have energy, and when it's not directed, it's like shooting from the hip.
Mhm.
It's like holding the fire hose that's going all over the place, but you get a nice tight group, or good placement, or direct that energy at something that you intend that's good for you. You can accomplish a lot of things.
Mhm.
But you're right, the intensity is there.
And inspiring people. It's very interesting. There's a generational thing happening with intensity,
Mhm.
and people who are younger than I'm 52. I'm 10 years older than my Ranger buddies are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And people who are in their 20s or maybe early 30s tend to see intensity as a character defect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people who are older seem to think of it more as a value or something that's good. But the important thing is we can inspire people and we can get people, motivated uh, to do things or motivated just about life, which is, you know, my cousin Josh Keesal, who is a 30-year Green Beret, says, I don't know how long he was in the Army, but for forever, he's a lieutenant colonel with 7th Group. And he says life is a special operation. So
Yeah.
just you're kind of dealing with life and getting the best of it instead of having it get the best of you is
Mhm.
important.
Yep.
What helped you maintain that sobriety when you started? Because I'll say for me, when I started, I knew I had to. It was the end of my relationship if I didn't, and that
Mhm.
was more important to me than drinking, which was at the top of my list at the time.
Mhm.
And the tsunami of feelings that I had to feel and hold and deal with and sit through were so intense.
Mhm.
I was fortunate not to relapse with alcohol or any drug, but I
How
can
did
see
you
why people do.
how did you do it though? How did you sit through the tsunami of feelings?
You know,
So,
a couple things I did, and I want to hear from you, Steve, too, about this is, I went to meetings. I
Mhm.
had friends who were bring me there. I had another Marine who was there. He was like, yeah, go there. Some people are kind of grouchy, but we'll hang out and it'll be okay. And besides that, I was working out nonstop because I had to do something with the energy.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
yeah, and I was touching on this in my earlier conversation on the show just with Lindsay,
Mm-hmm.
but working out is like cheating.
Mm-hmm.
And it really helps. I've had a really bad back and I haven't been to the gym in a couple weeks, but I took a long brisk walk this morning. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
how bad the back is. It wasn't a run,
Yeah.
and just some movement is so good to free the mind.
Mm-hmm.
But the
Yeah.
most important sense of relief that I got was talking with people who were like me.
Hmm.
And when I first got sober at the VA hospital, I was surrounded by a bunch of Vietnam combat vets, and,
Yeah.
those were great guys. And getting in touch with and talking with actually the guys I worked with in the Army, who I'm still very close with 3 or 4 of them, and I talk with maybe 6 or 7 of them once a year,
Mm-hmm.
is so important. I remember going down to Florida because I was a loss prevention guy and there was a hurricane there. And I saw my ranger buddy Sonny Kraus, and he and I were on the same machine gun team together. And when I saw the guy, we both were crying tears of joy, and we were so happy. One of the guys that I worked with said he felt like he had done a great thing just by being there when we got back together,
Yeah.
and,
It's
and so
so important that getting
the
together like that, that
Mhm.
I'm with you there, Steve, because if it hadn't been for this other Marine who brought me, to AA for a while, I wouldn't have lasted. I don't think I would have lasted at all because what remind me of when you're talking is the shared misery you go through with the guys when you're in
Mhm.
is doable because the other guys are there.
Mhm.
that's
You
right.
know, the
That's
shared
right.
suffering. You look around, you're like, this guy's doing it. He's doing it. I'm here. We're surviving this, and the same thing in the rooms. That's what
Mhm.
helped me.
I had
Uh,
that.
uh, uh,
I had that experience too. I was just going to say that the first few meetings I went to were at a place that I didn't really relate to the people. And I was
Mm-hmm.
doing that thing when you're newly sober of like, I'm different, I'm special. Like, oh, the place that was a little rough where I went, it was like, well, I have all my teeth still. So I'm
Yeah.
still got time to drink. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
And this woman showed up, and she was a speaker there, and she was really lovely and super cute, and she had a thick Irish accent, and she um, ended up being my sponsor. But she took one look at me and she said, "You're in the wrong fucking meeting." And I was like, "Huh." And she said, "Let's go to Palo Alto." And so, which is a whole different vibe, you know what I mean? Palo Alto is not
Right.
rough, and she brought me over there, and I'm in there with a bunch of like Stanford professors and Google engineers, and I'm like, in my little weird brain, I'm like, well, these people are better than me, you know what I mean? And yet still drunk. And so I was able to kind of open up my mind and my heart a little bit and hear their stories. And I was like, oh, that's me, that's me, that's me. And being
Hmm.
able to relate to what they went through took the shame out of it as well. Like, okay, I'm not alone in this. And then also just that camaraderie of having been through hell and still being alive on the other side was definitely the thing
Yeah.
that kind of kept me coming back to the rooms and not taking a drink.
Hmm.
Connection to God and meditation are so important in the tradition that keeps the three of us sober. But I was learning this is hysterical. I was learning about 8 count breathing from Leslie Martin at the post traumatic stress disorder outpatient services team. And anything that we is good for us, we're repelled by. Or you try it and it's great, and then you have to be encouraged to try it again. Is what I should say. And I it worked for me, and it was great. And I would start my days with praying on my knees in the morning and at night, and I would start my days with some spiritual devotion. I had the pleasure of speaking at a meeting in Venice, and it was, a bunch of painters, with paint on their clothes and artists and that kind of stuff. And it started with 20 minutes of silent meditation.
Wow.
Mhm.
And then I talked, and I felt like so calm and collected while I was talking. It was remarkable. And I was going into the first Thanksgiving where I met my now wife's uh, parents, and got to know those guys. And so I just kept meditating through that weekend. And I've been meditating ever since. And I'm not perfect. I'm not a 7 days a week guy, or even always a 5 days a week guy.
Mhm.
But
Hmm.
that really mellows you out, and takes the anxiety away in a way nothing else does. And
Yeah.
it doesn't mean I want to say this for anyone who's meditating for any reason, is don't think you have to feel calm while you're meditating
Right.
for the
Yeah.
meditation to make you calm.
That's true. Watching all
Exactly.
those.
Is that the gospel, right? Yeah, yeah.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
Because you're riding through those waves. You're riding through
Mhm.
those waves a lot of time, and some people apply maybe an Eastern tradition or a
Mhm.
idea of what meditation is, and that is for some people. And for some people, meditation can just be breathing mindfully and
Hmm.
focusing on something, or your breath,
Mhm.
or the feeling of your feet on the ground. But that it slows things down, and changes you from that fight or flight state into the rest and digest
Mhm.
state. And
Mhm.
Hmm.
It
those
doesn't.
first few minutes can be hell.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yes. I've had a lot of people say to me, like, well, I can't just, empty my brain. And I was thinking, like, and I said to them, like, that's not, no one does. I mean, if you can completely empty your mind of anything, you've got something going on with you. Let's go see a doctor if you can just
Yeah, you
completely
probably had
be
a
void
lobotomy.
of, yeah, like, that's not, and you
Yeah.
also don't have to sit in the lotus position, and you don't have to have your fingers in a certain way, that means something
Hmm.
in the Buddhist tradition, um, or what have you. But I'm with you, Stephen. I just wanted to say really quickly, I currently also have a bad back. I have a herniated disc in my lower back, and I have bursitis in my right hip. And to hear you talk about, okay, just meditate and go for a walk, is great for me, because I've right now in this state of what we refer to in AA as luxury problems. Like, I was a really pretty low bottom drunk, and I forget because it was 21 years ago, and so right now I'm like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do that race I wanted to do, and oh, I wanted to start running again, and now look what's happening, and poor me, and I'm not doing anything. I'm like, I'm just not really moving my body. I sit at my desk a lot for work, and then I'm like, my freaking back hurts, and this is bullshit, and blah, and
Were you embarrassed to stand at your desk? I was embarrassed to stand at my desk.
I'm at home, so I'm standing up. But yes, it's weird when you're in the office to stand up because as an accountant, there are a lot of people who never, they just don't move their bodies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I'll be in a office and everyone's quiet, no one's saying anything, and everyone's sitting at their desk. And here goes my desk as I'm getting up to the top. But
Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that because I'm like, oh, that's right. I just need to do a few simple things and I will feel better. I'll feel calm, you know?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's both things, like I think we talked about it last week, Lindsay, was
Mm-hmm.
just movement and stillness. Movement
Oh,
and
so
stillness.
so tying those things together, because I had a little bit of a thought earlier on that, and this is interesting that the movement and the stillness. I always tell people that when people get a massage, one of the reasons it's relaxing is people are awake, they're aware, and they're not broadcasting or they're
Mm-hmm.
not scheming in their mind. They're just there and
Yes.
present. And this is what exercise does as well.
Mm-hmm.
When you see someone struggling you guys are all serious. I've done a few half marathons and some 10Ks. That's the most distance running. And, a couple years out of the army and you don't want to be getting fat. And so what could focus you on running? So let's do a half marathon. But the interesting thing about it is when you're doing these things, you got to remind people that this is their time just to themselves. And you have to look at that. It's really beautiful when you're out running or when you're doing some sort of long, and I'm not a swimmer or a biker, but when you're out doing these things, this is solitude, and this is
Mm-hmm.
time for you to just let the thoughts go by like newspaper or tumbleweeds on the wind. and,
Yes.
and that's why this stuff is so excellent to us. Even if let's say we're lifting weights or something like that. Now you're concentrating on something kind of like concentrating on painting or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
where you're just able to kind of not be connected, to scheming or thinking or what's the next thing I should be doing and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's really important to us.
Scheming is a great word because my
Yeah.
brain loves to scheme on stuff,
Mm-hmm.
instead of
Yeah.
just thinking about it.
One of the
Yeah.
things I wanted to go back to, post traumatic stress and what made it so difficult for me and a lot of people I've talked to is that I didn't have the vocabulary for what was happening to me. It was chaos, and I didn't even have the word chaos to describe it. I was hyper vigilant. I was
That
irritated. All of these things, and nothing. I could not scratch that itch, no matter how many beers I drank or how many joints I smoked.
this is the greatest thing that I realized is like the fear model,
Mm-hmm.
and it's interesting because I still say jokingly, but as a half truth to people, it's like you know I'm always afraid. So it's kind of less things are scary.
Yeah.
But with the hypervigilance and then the fear model,
Mm-hmm.
which shows me that whenever I'm angry, somewhere underneath that is an underlying fear.
Yes.
And I realize that I'm dealing with the fear maybe differently than most people do.
Mm-hmm.
and I am a preconditioned for a preemptive strike.
Yeah.
And so if I think something is happening, I'm a machine gunner by trade.
Mm-hmm.
So if something is, if there's a threat that's way out on the horizon or way out there, I want to be the first to get rid of it, you
Yeah.
know? And you go through life this way, and you realize that you're causing more problems
Oh yeah.
than you're solving. And that idea of and it comes down to it. There's a lot of things that I enjoy that I had to get control of myself before I could enjoy,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't need to be that vigilant all the time. I
Yeah.
don't need to be that switched on all of the time. And another way I tell people, and I tell this to folks who are coming out of our lifestyle, or other lifestyles that were uh, deeply connected to violence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think being a Marine or being an airborne ranger is to embrace that part of human nature.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what we're here to do. I remember a chaplain telling us when we arrived at the 75th Ranger Regiment that this is a place where we're killing people, and if you have ever pictured yourself as living that way, you're in the right place, and if you don't think this is for you, then you're definitely not in the right place.
Yeah.
This
Right.
is a
It's a
chaplain,
chaplain. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he had beautiful pale gray eyes, like looked like he was the head welder for a motorcycle club. You know what I mean? It was wonderful. So you get this, you have uh, skills which are totally not applicable,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and you have to be ready to get rid of those. And it's really important to remind ourselves, to remind our friends, and to remind people who are just starting on the journey that there's a whole set of things which you developed, which don't, let's talk about the newscaster who used to be in the National Football League, and
Mm-hmm.
being able to throw footballs is no longer a necessary skill set. It's neat that he
Right.
knows about it so he could tell other people about it, but it's just something you don't have to be able to do anymore.
Yeah. Those
And
skills were for wartime, for combat, for violence and
yeah.
conflict. So we get back and we forget some of those things, the obvious things like, shooting, throwing grenades. We're like, okay, probably not applicable in the civilian world. But the other things like assaulting through an ambush, perceived or real,
Uh-huh.
or, snapping on somebody, that like those preemptive strikes, like you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Wartime, great. Peacetime, civilian time, not great.
Mm-hmm. And that's different from someone who has some sort of trauma from civilian activity. It seems like a little bit because I'll just, excuse me, I'll just speak for myself. One of the things that happened when I was drinking is that I um, hung around a lot of lower companions. My drinking
Mm-hmm.
looks better because theirs is so bad. And
Yeah.
one of those people stabbed me in the chest and left me for dead. And I obviously didn't die, but that's a trauma that I carry with me despite having gone through therapy for it and things like that. So for me, I don't really feel like I developed any skills that were useful. I just have this like lingering, I just had this lingering trauma. Um, but some of the hallmarks of that trauma sound similar to what you guys are talking about in terms of hypervigilance
Mm-hmm.
and being sort of a fear based individual. I would say I was not a fear based individual prior to this happening. And um, I can acknowledge I played a role in it because I knew I was being stalked and I still was drinking and like not locking my doors and just like passing out in my apartment and doing things that um, are behaviors when you have a lot of self-loathing, which is what I was experiencing. But I think some of the trauma response sounds a lot like what you guys are experiencing, although there
Yeah.
isn't any place in which my response to that was useful. If
Well,
that
the
makes sense.
difference is, Lindsay, is I understand it is the trauma response is the same in terms of hyperarousal, hypervigilance, irritation, and avoidance,
Mm-hmm.
and then sometimes dissociation. Um,
Mm-hmm.
However, the difference with veterans and other people in violent lifestyles is that we're trained being angry and aggressive is the way to go. And so that training is kicked into the fight and flight, right? And so we're like,
Mm-hmm.
go to what you know. Here we go. We're fighting. Why? I don't know, but it feels like I'm in danger, even though it's not there. We're acting on something that happened in the past that's still in our body, but we're
Mm.
fighting ghosts essentially.
And I'm
So
freezing. I'm just freezing. Is my response to that is to
Mm-hmm.
just not be able to be paralyzed with fear and not be able to do one thing or the other. Neither one of
Yeah.
those is particularly helpful when you're trying to live your life, I will say.
Yeah.
yes, so what Mike is specifically referring to are what we would call battle drills.
Yeah.
And you know, you have to have a few things where are they're so well rehearsed and so set in your primitive brain that the minute that you have a reckoning that this is what the situation is, you immediately go into this motion, oftentimes as a group, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is instinctive. And what the first thing I learned about post-traumatic stress disorder is that these things which cue the anxiety or the acute anxiety, they go straight into your primitive brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're not thinking about it. This is just you just immediately are in action mode,
Yes.
you know. And I'm sure it's the same for you or anyone who's had these experiences that change us, you know.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the way to go. It's you're right. Those when you're having a trauma reaction, you're not thinking about it like Steve is saying. It's not going in your head like, huh, this feels dangerous or any thoughts like that. It's skipping that prefrontal cortex and going right to the
Mm.
stem, right to the limbic system too, and you are just noticing and your body is involuntarily reacting.
So, what can be done when you're in that situation? You know what I mean? When you've got
Mm-hmm.
the primitive brain activated, because I've heard you guys describe, ways to deal with the energy that's there.
Yeah.
Exercising and meditating. But what happens when you're in sort of an acute um, instance of the PTSD, or how do you get out of it? I should say.
That's a very tough question. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
think the first thing that would come out of anyone's mouth is to remove yourself from the situation,
Yeah.
and that's very difficult with people like us because I think we're not people who we're very dedicated.
Yeah.
We don't want to, and occasionally we'll find a friend who has their head in their ass and trying to, trying to extricate them from that situation
Yeah.
is very difficult because they're in 100%, with whatever they do.
Right.
But getting
We're the
out of
run towards the bullets kind of guys, and
Mm.
the where running away might be the right answer, but removing yourself from the situation. Um,
Mm.
so sometimes, sometimes it takes a friend to,
mm-hmm.
just get you out of there,
Yeah, making eye contact sometimes. Just get with
Yeah.
someone who's out of it, who can lead you out through some breathing, walking, maybe
Mm.
talking, de-escalating the situation. I mean, long term things like EMDR
Mm.
or other trauma therapies that help reset the nervous
All of it
system.
works.
Yeah,
All of it works. There's nothing people are doing to help people every one of the methods anyone has ever tried is helpful. I didn't mean to
Mhm.
interrupt you, Mike,
No,
but
you're right.
I think it's important. I hear people talking about, treating post-traumatic stress with, hallucinogenic drugs and that kind of stuff. And I think that to me is, not something that makes sense inherently. But every sort of technique for helping people, I think is works.
Yeah.
Everything from the rapid eye movement to the,
Hmm.
all of it. Okay, all of it has helped a lot of people. I want to say one thing that's interesting because I'm not sure exactly that I've ever had great success helping people in that moment,
Hmm.
but I've had a lot of success talking with my friends and helping them in general. And one of the key things is not to make love to your problems.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what screwed up with me. And do I want to own this diagnosis, or do I want to carry that with me when it's not helpful?
Yeah.
And the important thing is to be able to get to work, and to be able to want to change, and then to start changing, and then right in the middle of doing something that is not the person you want to be, saying, okay, there's no reason that this detail matters to anybody,
Hmm.
except me. Because one of the things that post-traumatic stress disorder or post-operational stress, it's not Rambo going crazy in the sporting goods store with the cops surrounding him. Okay,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. And we've all had our wild incidents, and I don't discount those at all. But it's really about a feeling of anxiety that you can pass on to other people,
Yeah.
and not wanting to do that anymore. One
Hmm.
of the fascinating things I heard at the West LAVA is they said West Los Angeles, which has a giant Jewish population, is a place where private practice studied post traumatic stress disorder because grandparents who were Holocaust survivors were affecting their grandkids, you
Yeah.
know? And it's like, okay, this is something that, you have to work on, and be able to let go. You don't, you don't want those things around, and you have to make sure that you you continue to change or address or just let go of the things that aren't helpful.
Yeah. And one thing I'll say to bring it full circle here, it's like we talked about the importance of talking with other people who understand, or other people you're there with. In the moment, I believe that's been the most effective thing that's helped me,
A
and that's the
thousand
most
percent right.
right that I've known with other
Absolutely
people.
right.
Because when you make contact, eye contact with someone who's struggling, and you are in a calmer state, they can mirror that, or they can say, okay,
Hmm.
their body can slow down a little bit. Just like when you're, on the battlefield, and someone's starting to get a little stressed out, they look at someone who's got that cool, calm, collected look, and they're like, I think we got this. We're here together.
Hmm.
That's what I do on the airplane because I'm horrible with with turbulence, and I'm like looking at the, not to make light of it, but I'm looking at the
Yeah.
flight attendant and like, well, she seems to still be serving coffee, so I guess I'm just going to
Yeah.
calm down. You know what I mean?
It's
And
it's the whole
that.
reason having my dog at work with
Mm,
me, my trained
mm-hmm,
therapy dog, calms people down, because they see, like, okay, I'm having a bad day. I'm walking into this vet center or this VA, and I'm having a bad day, and I'm feeling like I am in danger because I'm hyper aroused. And you see this dog who's just wagging his tail, walking up to you to get pet, and your
mm,
nervous system starts to, and your brain says, well, maybe things are actually okay a little bit, and I can relax just a little bit.
So
It's an example we can draw on. Yeah.
Yeah.
absolutely. It is time for us to wrap it up, you guys. And this has been such a fascinating conversation. I could talk all day, but I'm sure the listeners like, my commute's over. Could you wrap her up?
We definitely need a part 3, I think.
Yeah, I
So
think we're going to
I,
need a part
I,
3.
I sure love talking with you guys, and I love the subject matter. I love focusing on the mind, body, and soul stuff.
mm-hmm.
Things that we can do to get the most out of life, and sharing life experience and optimizing our feelings. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Well,
but by action.
By
we
action.
had you on and we talked a lot about the first time about working out and moving your body and doing all those things. And now we've had you on talking about the mind. So we are going to have to do part 3, talking about the soul. I think that would be an interesting conversation. I'm sure all 3 of us have a different technique and methodology and belief system. So there are similarities and then there's differences in that. And I think that would be a great conversation.
Yes.
Mike, any last words before we shut her down?
A couple things just for people listening who has brought up any feelings in you, and you're having some feelings. One number as a veteran you can always call is 988. That's the crisis line. If you need to talk to somebody and you're just not feeling okay, 988. Just give them a call.
Wow.
And there are people at local VAs and vet centers, which are part of the VA, that you can go and talk to. That have some experience, maybe not the same experience you've had because your experience is individual, but giving it a shot. And that's what turned my life around too. Is I had a
That's
Vietnam vet.
absolutely right.
Yeah. I had a Vietnam vet bring me to a vet center and said, you kind of look fucked up like I did in Nam after I got back. You're going to go and talk to these people. And I didn't want to, but I trusted this guy. And you know what? Despite my best efforts, it worked. I felt a lot better.
Well, thank you so much. Oh, and I hear Mike's kids, and Mike has
Yeah,
to
they're
make
ready.
them breakfast. So I know
All right.
that is our time when those kids start yelling. It's like we're done.
Yeah.
So
All
everybody,
right.
please, I want to say thank you to Steve for coming on again. It was a pleasure. Listeners, if
The
you wouldn't
pleasure is all
mind,
mine.
I mean, we're going to have you back for sure. Um, Listeners, if you don't mind reviewing and giving us stars, we would like 5 stars from you, but whatever it is, say it, say the truth, and we'll take any feedback, and share the podcast with someone you think who, would enjoy it or could use the feedback. All righty. We will see you guys next week.
All right.
Bye.
See ya.
Thank you for having me.